somewhere in the Egyptian desert, the sun has been gone for about an hour. The sand is still warm from the day's punishment, still radiating heat like a dying furnace, and the rocks are ticking softly as they cool and contract. Nothing moves, nothing breathes. The landscape looks like the surface of a dead planet, stripped bare by 100 million years of wind. And then, from beneath a flat stone no bigger than your hand, something shifts. A pale yellow body, no longer than your index finger, emerges in segments. First, the flattened head, two dark median eyes catching the faint starlight. Then the slender pincers, so thin they look almost decorative, almost fragile. Then the narrow, segmented tail, curled forward over the body like a loaded spring, tipped with a stinger that gleams dark at its very end, almost black against the ghostly yellow of the rest of the animal. The whole creature weighs less than a penny. It could sit comfortably in the palm of your hand, though you would deeply, deeply regret letting it do so. This is Leiurus quinquestriatus, the five-striped smooth-tail, the Omdurman's scorpion, the Palestine yellow scorpion. But you probably know it by its far more theatrical name, the one that sounds like a villain from a fantasy novel or a heavy metal album. The Deathstalker, and here is a fact that might keep you watching for the next few minutes. This animal, this pale little desert ghost that weighs about as much as a raisin, produces a liquid that is, drop for drop, the most expensive substance on the face of the earth. A single gallon of its venom, if you could somehow gather that much, would cost you roughly $39 million. That is not a typo. 39 million, more expensive than gold, more expensive than platinum, more expensive than printer ink, which, as we all know, is already an outrage. And the reason it commands that price is not just because it is astonishingly difficult to collect, though it is because this tiny scorpion's venom contains a molecule that can find cancer cells in the human brain and light them up like a neon sign. Something no other technology on Earth can do with that kind of precision. A creature whose sting can stop a child's heart is also, paradoxically, one of the most promising tools in the fight against one of humanity's deadliest cancers. That is the story of the Deathstalker, and it is far stranger and more fascinating than its ominous name suggests. But before we talk about what this animal's venom can do in a laboratory, we need to talk about what it does in the desert. Because the Deathstalker did not evolve its venom for us, it evolved its venom for a world of sand and silence. A world where the difference between eating and being eaten is measured in milliseconds, and where the margin between survival and death is thinner than the waxy layer on a scorpion's exoskeleton. To understand this animal, we have to go back. Way, way back, before the deserts existed, before the continents looked anything like they do today, before there were mammals or birds or even dinosaurs. We need to go back to a time when scorpions lived underwater, and the land was a silent, empty frontier that almost nothing had dared to cross. The story of scorpions does not begin in the desert. It begins in the ocean, roughly 437 million years ago, during a stretch of geological time called the Silurian period. The world was unrecognizable. The continents were bunched together in strange configurations. Most complex life was still aquatic. The land, such as it was, hosted little more than thin mats of primitive plants, few adventurous arthropods, testing the boundaries of what was possible outside the water. In 2020, researchers at Ohio State University published a landmark paper describing a fossil scorpion they had unearthed from the Waukesha biota in Wisconsin, a region that, during the Silurian, had been a warm, shallow sea. They named this animal Perioscorpio venator, which translates roughly to hunter progenitor scorpion. And it was about 2.5 centimeters long, roughly the size of many scorpions alive today. What made the discovery extraordinary was not just its age, making it the oldest scorpion fossil ever identified at the time, but the astonishing preservation of its internal anatomy. Under a microscope, the researchers could see the outlines of its digestive tract, its circulatory structures, and even its respiratory system. And those internal organs looked almost identical to the ones inside modern scorpions. Let that sink in for a moment. The internal plumbing of a scorpion alive today is structurally the same as the internal plumbing of a scorpion that lived 437 million years ago. That is a design so successful, so perfectly calibrated to the demands of survival, that evolution essentially stopped tinkering with it. As Professor Lauren Babcock, one of the study's authors, put it, this ancient scorpion appeared to be pre-adapted for life on land, possessing the respiratory and circulatory machinery for terrestrial existence, even while it was still living in or near the water. The internal breathing structures resembled both the book lungs of modern land-dwelling scorpions and the gills of marine arthropods like horseshoe crabs, suggesting that the transition from sea to shore may not have required the dramatic physiological overhaul that scientists once assumed. Scorpions, in other words, did not have to reinvent themselves to conquer the land. They were already built for it. They just had to walk ashore, and walk ashore they did over the following tens of millions of years. Scorpion lineages gradually shifted from aquatic and semi-aquatic lifestyles to fully terrestrial ones. During the Devonian period, roughly 400 to 360 million years ago, scorpions were diversifying and spreading across the ancient supercontinents. Some of them were enormous by modern standards. During the Carboniferous period, around 330 million years ago, a species called Pulmonoscorpius kirktonensis stalked the swampy forests of what is now Scotland, and it was about 70 centimeters long, nearly 2.5 feet of armored, stinging predator sharing the underbrush with giant millipedes and dragonflies with wingspans the width of a dinner table. But the giants were an exception. Over time, as oxygen levels dropped and ecosystems shifted, scorpions trended smaller. Their body plan, however, that segmented body, those grasping pincers, that flexible tail tipped with a venom-delivering stinger, that stayed. More than 100 fossil scorpion species have been described, and the remarkable consistency of their anatomy across hundreds of millions of years has earned them the informal title of living fossils, a phrase that perhaps undersells just how dynamically successful their design has been. They did not survive by staying the same because they failed to change. They survived by staying the same because their fundamental architecture was so effective that change was unnecessary. By the Triassic period, around 250 million years ago, fossils belonging to the modern scorpion superfamilies, Bathydia and Chactidia, had already appeared, meaning that the major branches of the scorpion family tree we see today were already established before the first dinosaurs had even gotten properly started. The dinosaurs rose and fell. The continents drifted apart. Ice ages came and went. And through all of it, scorpions kept doing what scorpions do, hunting in the dark, hiding in cracks, and delivering precisely calibrated doses of chemical warfare through the tips of their tails. To understand where the Deathstalker fits within this ancient lineage, you need to understand its family. Leiurus quinquestriatus belongs to the Bathidae, which is the largest family of scorpions on Earth. As of recent counts, the Bathidae contains roughly 100 genera and over 1,300 described species, making it a truly enormous group that is distributed across tropical and subtropical environments worldwide. Bathids are found on every inhabited continent, and they are, collectively, the most medically significant family of scorpions. Of the roughly 25 scorpion species whose venom can kill a human, all but one belong to the Bathidae. The family has a few common physical traits that set it apart. Bathid scorpions tend to have relatively slender pincers, almost tweezer-like, compared to the massive, crushing claws you see on scorpions from other families, like the Scorpionidae, which includes the hefty emperor scorpion. This is not a coincidence. There is a well-documented trade-off in scorpion biology between pincer strength and venom potency. Species with big, powerful pincers tend to have weaker venom because they can physically overpower their prey. Species with slender, weak pincers tend to have much stronger venom because they rely on chemistry rather than brute force to subdue their meals. The Deathstalker sits firmly on the weak pincers, devastating venom end of this spectrum. Its chelae, the technical term for the pincers, are thin, almost delicate-looking. They have very little crushing power. This animal does not wrestle its food into submission. It stings fast. The genus Leiurus itself was originally described as a subgenus of Androctonus, another notoriously venomous Bathid, back in 1829 by the German naturalist Christian Gottfried Ehrenberg. In 1949, the French arachnologist Max Vachon elevated Leiurus to full genus status. For decades, Leiurus was considered monotypic, meaning scientists believed it contained only a single species, Leiurus quinquestriatus, with two subspecies. But taxonomy, like geology, is a field where what seems settled has a habit of shifting underfoot. In 2014, the subspecies Leiurus quinquestriatus hebrius was separated out and elevated to its own species, Leiurus hebrius, and the splitting did not stop there. Additional species have since been described from Jordan, Yemen, Cameroon, Turkey, and Saudi Arabia. A 2024 study even described a new species, Leiurus hodibi, from a protected area in Saudi Arabia's Riyadh province. The genus, it turns out, is more diverse than anyone suspected for most of the 20th century, with distinct lineages in northeastern Africa and across the Arabian Peninsula, showing clear genetic divergence. The name Leiurus quinquestriatus translates from Latin and Greek roots as five-striped smooth tail, a reference to the faint longitudinal markings visible on the animal's metasoma, or tail segments. It is, admittedly, a far less dramatic name than Deathstalker, which is a colloquial invention that appears to have emerged from the exotic pet trade and the popular press as recently as a couple of decades ago. This animal was more commonly known as the yellow scorpion or the Palestine yellow scorpion. Perfectly serviceable names that did not exactly set the internet on fire. The rebranding worked, though. Deathstalker gets clicks, and the animal, to be fair, has the resume to back it up. Look at a Deathstalker up close, and the first thing you notice is how unassuming it appears. This is not a massive, intimidating animal. Adults typically range from about 3 to a little over 4 inches in length, with females tending to run slightly larger than males. They weigh between 1 and 2.5 grams. In terms of sheer size, they are dwarfed by many of their scorpion relatives. The emperor scorpion can exceed 8 inches. Even the fat-tailed scorpion, Androctonus, a close relative of the Buthidae, tends to be bulkier. The Deathstalker is lean, almost wiry, built less like a tank and more like a sports car. Its coloration is its most immediately distinctive feature. The body is a pale, straw-like yellow, sometimes shifting toward a faint greenish or orange tint, depending on the local environment and the individual. Horizontal stripes of a light grayish-brown cross the cephalothorax and the abdominal segments, giving the animal a subtle banded appearance. A darker vertical line often runs along the midline from the head toward the base of the tail. The tail segments themselves may be freckled with dark brown spots. And the final segment, the one just before the bulbous telson that houses the venom glands and the stinger, is typically noticeably darker than the rest of the body, sometimes nearly black. The stinger itself is dark. This color pattern, pale body with a darkened tail tip, is a useful field identification marker, though it is not unique to this species and should not be relied upon alone for identification, especially in a group where misidentification can have serious medical consequences. The body plan follows the standard scorpion template, which, as we discussed, has been essentially unchanged for hundreds of millions of years. The front section, called the prosoma, is covered by a carapace and bears the chelicerae, the small mouth appendages used for tearing food, and the pedipalps, the pincers. Behind this sits the opisthosoma, which is divided into the broad mesosoma, the main body, and the narrow, 5-segmented metasoma, which is what we casually call the tail. The metasoma ends in the telson, a bulb-shaped structure that contains a pair of venom glands surrounded by muscles. When a scorpion stings, those muscles contract and squeeze venom through 2 ducts that exit through openings near the tip of the curved barb. It is an injection system, precise and efficient, and the Deathstalker can deploy it with startling speed, whipping its tail forward at speeds that have been measured at up to 128 centimeters per second in defensive strikes. The eyes are worth mentioning because they are both impressive and, paradoxically, almost useless. Like other scorpions, the Deathstalker has a pair of median eyes positioned on top of the carapace, plus 2 to 5 pairs of smaller lateral eyes arranged along the front edges of the head. In total, it can have up to 12 eyes. Despite this seemingly excessive optical hardware, scorpion vision is extremely poor. They cannot form sharp images. What they can do, and what they do remarkably well, is detect changes in light intensity. Their median eyes are among the most light-sensitive in the entire animal kingdom, capable of registering incredibly low levels of illumination. This makes sense for an animal that lives and hunts exclusively at night. It does not need to see the details. It needs to know whether the world above its hiding spot is bright enough to be dangerous. And then there is the glow. All scorpions, including the Deathstalker, fluoresce under ultraviolet light, emitting an eerie blue-green radiance that makes them look like something from a science fiction film. The source of this glow is the hyaline layer, a thin, extremely tough coating within the scorpion's exoskeleton. This layer contains specific chemical compounds, including beta-carboline and a substance related to 7-hydroxyphormethylcoumarin, which absorb ultraviolet radiation and re-emit it at longer, visible wavelengths, typically in the range of 450 to 500 nanometers, which our eyes perceive as that distinctive blue-green color. The fluorescence is remarkably durable. Scorpion fossils millions of years old can still glow under UV light. If you preserve a scorpion in alcohol, the alcohol itself will fluoresce because the compounds leach out of the exoskeleton. Freshly molted scorpions, however, do not glow. The fluorescence only appears after the new exoskeleton has hardened, suggesting that the glowing compounds are either a byproduct of the hardening process or are deposited shortly afterward. Why scorpions glow remains one of the genuinely unresolved mysteries in arachnid biology. Several hypotheses have been proposed. One suggests the fluorescence acts as a kind of natural sunscreen, absorbing harmful UV radiation before it can penetrate the softer tissues beneath. Another proposes that scorpions use their entire exoskeleton as a full-body light sensor, essentially a giant eye, allowing them to gauge ambient UV levels and decide whether conditions are safe enough to emerge from their burrows. This idea is supported by observations that scorpions tend to be less active on brightly moonlit nights and during full moons, when reflected UV is at its highest. A third hypothesis suggests the glow might play a role in recognizing other scorpions in low light conditions. None of these ideas has been definitively proven, and it is possible the answer involves a combination of factors or something we have not yet considered. What is certain is that the trait is ancient, widespread, and deeply embedded in scorpion biology. If scorpion eyes are essentially just light meters, how does an animal like the Deathstalker navigate, hunt, find mates, and avoid predators in the pitch-dark desert? The answer lies in an array of sensory organs that are, in some ways, more sophisticated than eyes could ever be. The most remarkable of these are the pectinges, a pair of comb-shaped organs located on the underside of the scorpion's body, just behind the last pair of walking legs. These structures are unique to scorpions. No other animal on Earth has anything quite like them. Each pecten consists of a rigid spine supporting an array of teeth, and each tooth is covered with hundreds of tiny, peg-shaped sensory structures called peg sensilla. A single pair of pectinges can contain over 100,000 sensory neurons, a staggering amount of neural hardware for an animal this size. As the scorpion walks, the pectinges drag across the ground, essentially tasting and touching the substrate simultaneously. More than 90% of those sensory neurons are chemosensory, meaning they detect chemical signatures, traces of pheromones left by potential mates, residues from the passage of prey, the molecular fingerprints of a familiar path back to the home burrow. Recent computational research has even suggested that scorpions may use their pectinces to navigate by chemotextural familiarity, building a kind of chemical tactile map of the ground around their home territory, similar to how some insects use visual landmarks. If this is true, then the scorpion is essentially reading the desert floor like Braille, memorizing its roots through touch and taste rather than sight. In addition to the pectinces, scorpions possess slit-like tarsal sensory organs near the tips of their legs. These structures are exquisitely sensitive to substrate vibrations. When a cricket walks across sand 20 centimeters away, the vibrations travel through the ground and reach these sensors, and the scorpion can determine not just that something is moving, but the direction it is coming from and roughly how far away it is. This is not unlike the lateral line system in fish, which detects pressure waves in water. The scorpion's version works in sand and soil, and it is precise enough to guide a successful strike in total darkness. The Deathstalker also has tiny sensory hairs, called trichobothria, on its pedipalps. These hairs are so sensitive that they can detect air currents generated by the wing beats of a passing insect or the approach of a predator. They provide an early warning system, a way to sense movement in the air before anything touches the scorpion's body. Combining all of these inputs, the Deathstalker constructs a rich sensory picture of its world without needing to see it. It is listening through its feet. It is tasting the ground with its combs. It is feeling the air with its hair. And when all of these signals converge on a target, the response is brutal and efficient. The Deathstalker is an ambush predator. It does not chase its food. It waits, motionless, near the entrance of its burrow or beneath a rock. And when a cricket, a beetle, or a spider wanders within range, it strikes. The pincers snap forward to grab, not to crush, simply to hold. And the tail lashes over the body in a fraction of a second to deliver the sting. The whole sequence, from detection to injection, can be over before the prey has any chance to react. Its diet consists primarily of small invertebrates: crickets, beetles, centipedes, spiders, earthworms, and notably other scorpions. Cannibalism is not rare in this species. When food is scarce, Deathstalkers will absolutely eat each other. They rarely drink water in the conventional sense. Instead, they extract moisture from the bodies of their prey, absorbing fluids through the flesh and organs of whatever they have caught, in a landscape where standing water might not exist for hundreds of miles. This ability to derive hydration entirely from food is not a luxury. It is a necessity. The Deathstalker's range is vast, stretching across a wide band of arid and hyperarid territory from North Africa through the Middle East and into parts of Central and South Asia. You can find this species, or its close relatives in the Leiurus genus, in Algeria, Mali, Niger, Chad, Libya, Tunisia, Egypt, Sudan, Ethiopia, Somalia, and across the Arabian Peninsula in countries including Saudi Arabia, Yemen, Oman, the United Arab Emirates, Kuwait, Bahrain, Qatar, Iraq, Jordan, Lebanon, Syria, Israel, and Turkey. Its distribution extends eastward through Iran and into parts of Pakistan, northwestern India's Thar Desert, and the Central Asian nations of Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan. It is, in other words, an animal of the Great Desert Belt that stretches from the Atlantic coast of the Sahara to the steppes of Central Asia. Within this enormous range, the Deathstalker is selective about where it actually lives. It prefers deserts and semi-arid scrublands that do not have extensive sand dune systems. It likes hard, rocky ground with plenty of flat stones to hide beneath. It avoids open dune fields, probably because the shifting, unstable substrate does not support the kind of burrows and crevices it relies on for shelter. It typically creates shallow burrows about 20 centimeters deep beneath rocks, though it will also occupy abandoned burrows dug by other animals. These habitats experience some of the most extreme temperatures on Earth, with daytime highs regularly exceeding 43 degrees Celsius, well over 100 degrees Fahrenheit. At night, temperatures can plummet dramatically, creating a daily thermal roller coaster that would be lethal to most animals. The Deathstalker survives this through a combination of behavioral and physiological adaptations that are shared to varying degrees by desert scorpions generally. First and most importantly, it is strictly nocturnal. It spends the entire day underground, emerging only after sunset when temperatures drop and humidity rises slightly. This simple behavioral strategy eliminates the most dangerous period of heat and desiccation. Its exoskeleton provides a second layer of protection. Scorpion cuticle is coated with a thin, waxy layer that dramatically reduces evaporative water loss through the body surface. This waxy barrier is so effective that scorpions have the lowest water loss rate of any terrestrial arthropod, a distinction that is central to their ability to live in places where water is almost non-existent. Their excretory system is also engineered for water conservation. Scorpions eliminate waste through structures called Malpighian tubules, and the waste they produce is nearly dry, consisting primarily of guanine rather than the water-intensive urea or uric acid used by many other animals. Every drop of water that enters the body is retained and recycled to the maximum degree possible. And then there is the metabolism trick. When food becomes scarce, which in the desert can mean weeks or months between meals, scorpions can drop their metabolic rate to as little as 1/3 of their normal level. This is not a gradual winding down. It is an active, controlled suppression that allows the animal to survive on almost nothing, requiring just a tiny amount of oxygen and burning through its energy reserves at a glacial pace. Some scorpions have been documented surviving on as few as 1 or 2 insects per year using this strategy. And yet, when prey does wander within range, the scorpion can snap back to full metabolic capacity almost instantly, going from near dormancy to lethal predator in the time it takes a cricket to take a step. This capacity to toggle between extreme energy conservation and explosive action is one of the most impressive survival adaptations in the animal kingdom. The Deathstalker is also a fiercely territorial animal. Individuals tend to stay within their established home range and do not wander. This fidelity to place makes sense when you consider the investment involved in finding and maintaining a good burrow, a shelter that provides the right microclimate, protection from predators, and proximity to hunting grounds. Abandoning that for a random walk through the desert would be a dangerous gamble. Its legs deserve a mention here, because they are part of what makes this particular scorpion so effective in its environment compared to many other scorpion species. The Deathstalker has noticeably thin, elongated legs, almost spindly in appearance. These are not the stocky, load-bearing limbs of a burrowing specialist. They are built for speed and agility on flat, hard ground. The Deathstalker can cross open stretches of desert floor with a quickness that surprises people who encounter it for the first time. It is not lumbering or ponderous. It is fast, darting, and reactive, capable of closing the distance to prey or retreating to cover in an instant. Combined with its low, flat body profile, which allows it to squeeze into the thinnest crevices beneath rocks and into cracks that would seem impossibly narrow. The Deathstalker is an animal that treats the desert landscape like a three-dimensional puzzle, exploiting every gap, every overhang, every shadow. Its exoskeleton also serves multiple functions beyond simple armor. The cuticle is layered and remarkably strong relative to the animal's weight, providing protection against crushing from the rocks beneath which the scorpion shelters. But it is also a critical barrier against the desert's relentless aridity. The waxy epicuticle, the outermost layer, is nearly impermeable to water vapor under normal conditions. It is only at extremely high temperatures, above roughly 38 degrees Celsius at the cuticular surface, that the wax layer begins to lose its effectiveness, and water loss through the skin increases dramatically by staying underground during the day. When surface temperatures can soar far beyond that threshold, the Deathstalker keeps its cuticle within the range where it functions as an effective moisture seal. The whole strategy, nocturnal activity, burrowing, waxy exoskeleton, dry waste excretion, and metabolic suppression work as an integrated system. Remove any one element, and the animal would be in serious trouble. Together, they form one of the most refined packages of desert adaptation in the animal kingdom. There is also a social dimension to the Deathstalker's life that contradicts its solitary reputation. While most scorpion species are strictly solitary and will attack any conspecific they encounter outside of mating season, Deathstalkers show a surprising tolerance for each other under certain conditions. Keepers who maintain them in captivity have reported adults sharing hides and burrows without conflict, sometimes squeezing 4 individuals into a single shelter, even when other hides were available. This communal tendency has its limits, of course. Juveniles are vulnerable during molting, when their soft, unhardened exoskeletons leave them defenseless, and cannibalism during these windows is well documented. But the fact that adult Deathstalkers can coexist in close quarters without immediately trying to eat each other sets them apart from many of their more aggressively solitary relatives and hints at a level of social tolerance that has not been fully explored by researchers. Now we come to the part that earned this animal its name: the venom. Deathstalker venom is a complex biochemical cocktail, a blend of dozens of distinct proteins, peptides, enzymes, and other bioactive molecules that have been refined by natural selection over hundreds of millions of years into a remarkably efficient weapon. The major active components are neurotoxins, and they come in several varieties, each targeting different parts of the nervous system with unsettling precision. The most medically significant toxins in Deathstalker venom are the ones that target voltage-gated ion channels, the tiny protein gates embedded in the membranes of nerve and muscle cells that control the flow of electrically charged atoms, ions, in and out of the cell. These channels are the fundamental infrastructure of the nervous system. Every sensation you feel, every muscle you contract, every heartbeat, every breath, depends on the precise opening and closing of sodium, potassium, calcium, and chloride channels. When those channels malfunction, the consequences are immediate and severe. The Deathstalker's venom contains alpha-type sodium channel toxins, including a particularly well-studied one called LQH Roman 3. These peptides bind to specific regions on voltage-gated sodium channels and inhibit their fast inactivation. Under normal circumstances, a sodium channel opens briefly, allows a burst of sodium ions into the cell to generate a nerve impulse, and then quickly closes and resets. LQH Roman 3 and related toxins jam the channel in a partially open configuration, preventing it from resetting properly. The result is that nerve cells fire repeatedly and uncontrollably, causing a cascade of effects: intense pain, involuntary muscle contractions, excessive release of neurotransmitters, and disruption of the signals that coordinate breathing and heartbeat. The venom also contains charybditoxin, a 37 amino acid peptide that blocks calcium-activated potassium channels. Potassium channels are responsible for repolarizing nerve cells after they fire, essentially resetting the system so it can fire again in a controlled manner. When these channels are blocked, the repolarization process stalls, leading to prolonged and abnormal electrical activity in nerve and muscle tissue. There's also chlorotoxin, the peptide that blocks small conductance chloride channels. We will return to chlorotoxin shortly, because it has become the star of an entirely different story. But in the context of a sting, its role is to further disrupt the normal electrochemical balance of cells, particularly in nerve tissue. The combined effect of these toxins hitting the human body simultaneously is devastating. The sting itself is described as extraordinarily painful, reportedly about 100 times more intense than a bee sting, though pain comparisons are notoriously subjective. Beyond the pain, envenomation can produce a range of systemic symptoms: profuse sweating, nausea, vomiting, elevated heart rate, elevated blood pressure, difficulty breathing, blurred vision, involuntary muscle twitching, and, in severe cases, convulsions and paralysis. For a healthy adult, a Deathstalker sting is a medical emergency that is almost always survivable with prompt treatment. The venom's lethal dose is low, meaning it does not take much to cause serious harm. But the amount delivered in a single sting is typically insufficient to kill an otherwise healthy person over about 60 kilograms. The real danger is to the vulnerable: young, children, elderly individuals, people with pre-existing heart conditions, and anyone who has an anaphylactic allergic reaction to the venom components. A study from Israel documented a notably high rate of pancreatitis following Deathstalker envenomation, adding another unpleasant item to the list of potential complications. When a Deathstalker sting does prove fatal, the cause of death is usually pulmonary edema, a life-threatening accumulation of fluid in the lungs caused by the venom's effects on the cardiovascular system. Antivenom exists. It is produced by several pharmaceutical entities, including AbbVie, Sanofi Pasteur, and the National Antivenom and Vaccine Production Center in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. However, treating Deathstalker envenomation is not straightforward. The venom is unusually resistant to antivenom therapy, and patients typically require larger doses of antivenom than would be needed for stings from other scorpion species in countries outside the Deathstalker's native range, particularly the United States. None of the existing antivenoms are approved by the Food and Drug Administration, which means that if an exotic pet owner in, say, Arizona gets stung by their Deathstalker, the treating physicians may have to obtain antivenom as an investigational drug, a process that adds complexity and delay to what is already an urgent situation. This is one of the many reasons why keeping Deathstalkers as pets is, to put it mildly, inadvisable, and is increasingly illegal or restricted in many jurisdictions around the world. But here is something worth emphasizing. Scorpion venom is not a blunt instrument. It is a precision toolkit. Research has revealed that scorpions, including the Deathstalker, can actually modulate their venom delivery. They possess two types of venom: a milder prevenom that is metabolically cheaper to produce and is used for warning stings and minor defensive encounters, and a full-strength venom reserved for serious threats and prey capture. This is a sophisticated form of resource management. Venom is biologically expensive to produce, and a scorpion that spent its full payload on every minor threat would quickly exhaust its supply and be left defenseless. The ability to meter venom use is just one more example of the refined efficiency that characterizes everything about this animal's biology. If the Deathstalker's hunting strategy is all cold precision and lethal efficiency, its reproductive behavior is, by contrast, an elaborate, high-stakes performance that borders on the romantic, at least by arachnid standards. Mating season typically begins during the warmer months, late spring through summer, when both sexes are at their most active. The process starts with the male locating a receptive female, a task accomplished primarily through chemistry. Females release pheromones, chemical signals that the male detects using his pectinins, those exquisitely sensitive comb organs on his underside. When a male picks up the scent of a receptive female, he may begin juddering, a full-body vibration that produces substrate-borne signals the female can sense through the ground. The approach itself is an exercise in cautious optimism. The male knows, on some instinctive level, that the female he is approaching is also a predator. A hungry or unreceptive female may view a male not as a potential mate, but as a meal. So the male's first move, before anything else, is to grasp the female's pincers with his own. This is not a romantic gesture. It is a survival strategy. By locking pincers with the female, the male neutralizes her two most immediately dangerous weapons, her chelae, and gains a measure of control over the interaction. What follows is the promenade adieu, a phrase borrowed from ballroom dancing that means a walk for two. Locked together by their pincers, the male leads the female in a back-and-forth, circular walking pattern that can last several minutes. He is testing her receptivity and simultaneously searching for a suitable patch of substrate. When he finds one, he deposits a spermatophore, a small packet of sperm, onto the ground. Then, still grasping her pincers, he carefully maneuvers the female so that her genital opening, located on the underside of her body, is positioned directly over the spermatophore, allowing her to take up the sperm. Once the transfer is complete, the two scorpions separate, and the male, if he is wise or lucky, departs before the female's mood shifts. The female is the dominant partner in this entire process, and her judgment is final if she finds the male's performance inadequate, or if she simply decides she is not interested. The courtship can end abruptly and violently. Female Deathstalkers have been observed becoming extremely aggressive toward rejected suitors, and there are accounts of females killing and eating males who failed to impress. This is not universal, but it is a genuine risk, and it means that for many male Deathstalkers, the act of reproduction is also the most dangerous thing they will ever do. If mating is successful, the female enters a gestation period that averages about 185 days, but can range from 122 to 277 days, depending on conditions. Deathstalkers are viviparous, meaning the young develop inside the mother's body and are born alive, rather than hatching from externally laid eggs. Litter sizes vary considerably, from 35 to 87 offspring, with an average of around 63. The newborns, called scorplings, look like miniature versions of the adults and are relatively large for their species. Immediately after birth, the scorplings climb onto their mother's back, where they will stay for the duration of their first instar, the period before their first molt. During this time, the mother provides protection, and the close contact helps the young scorpions regulate their moisture levels. A critical concern for animals so small that they can dehydrate rapidly. The mother does not feed them directly. They rely on their yolk reserves until they are ready to molt and disperse. In Deathstalkers specifically, the birthing process is notable because the newborns drop from the genital opening onto the ground, and the mother assists their ascent onto her back by placing a leg beneath them to act as a ramp. After the first molt, the scorplings leave their mother and begin their solitary lives. They will molt multiple times before reaching maturity, and at each stage, they look essentially like smaller versions of the adult. The lifespan of Deathstalkers in the wild is estimated at about 4 to 6 years, though some sources suggest that under favorable conditions, they may live longer. Scorpions, as a group, have widely varying lifespans, from about 4 years in some smaller species to 25 years in some of the larger ones. For all its chemical weaponry, the Deathstalker is not invincible. It has enemies, and some of them are alarmingly good at their jobs. Other scorpions are a major threat. Cannibalism is common in the Deathstalker's world, and encounters between individuals, especially during lean times, frequently end with the smaller or weaker animal being eaten by the larger one. This kind of intraspecific predation is a significant source of mortality and may play a role in regulating population density. Centipedes are another formidable opponent. Large centipedes are aggressive, fast, and equipped with their own venomous forcipules, modified front legs that deliver a toxic bite. In confrontations between centipedes and scorpions, the centipede wins more often than you might expect. Their speed, flexibility, and the ability to attack from multiple angles make them a serious adversary for an animal that relies on a single direction tail strike. But perhaps the Deathstalker's most fascinating predator is a bat. The desert long-eared bat, Otonycterus hemperchae, is a ground-gleaning specialist that has made scorpions a dietary staple. Research conducted in Israel found that scorpion fragments made up as much as 70% of the bat's droppings during certain times of the year, and these were not just any scorpions. The bat's diet included Leiurus quinquestriatus, the Deathstalker itself. The hunting method is remarkable. The desert long-eared bat uses a form of passive acoustic detection rather than active echolocation to find its prey. It flies low over the desert floor, listening for the faint sounds of scorpion footsteps on sand. When it detects a walking scorpion, it drops straight down onto it, grabs it, and begins biting. The scorpion naturally fights back, stinging the bat repeatedly, often on the head and face, sometimes even under an eyelid. And the bat simply does not care. Researchers who filmed these encounters observed that the bats made no attempt to avoid or disable the stinger. They showed no signs of distress, no swelling, no behavioral changes after being stung multiple times by one of the most venomous scorpions on the planet. The working hypothesis is that the desert long-eared bat possesses at least partial immunity to scorpion venom, though the exact mechanism has not yet been fully characterized. The bat eats the entire scorpion, stinger and venom glands included, and goes looking for the next one. This is a humbling reminder that even the most sophisticated chemical defenses can be neutralized by evolution. The scorpion's venom, refined over hundreds of millions of years into a potent neurotoxic cocktail, is rendered irrelevant by a mammal that weighs less than an ounce. Nature's arms races produce no permanent winners, only temporary advantages. Owls are also significant predators of scorpions across their range, using their silent flight and exceptional low-light vision to locate and dispatch scorpions before the animals can mount a defense. Their approach is typically a swift, vertical strike from above, and the scorpion's tail-forward defensive posture, while effective against ground-level threats, offers little protection against a predator dropping down from the sky. Great horned owls and eagle owls in the Middle East and North Africa include scorpions as a regular dietary component, particularly during seasons when other prey is scarce. Lizards, shrews, and mongooses round out the list of common scorpion predators, with meerkats being particularly notable for their learned hunting technique of nipping off the scorpion's stinger before consuming the rest of the body. This is not an instinctive behavior. Adult meerkats actively teach their young how to handle scorpions, presenting progressively more dangerous prey items as the juveniles develop their skills. First, an adult will bring a dead scorpion, then a live scorpion with its stinger removed. Then, eventually, an intact, fully armed scorpion that the youngster must subdue on its own. It is a curriculum of escalation, a structured apprenticeship in predation, and it speaks to the cognitive sophistication that living alongside venomous prey can demand. The grasshopper mouse of the American Southwest, while not a predator of the Deathstalker specifically, deserves a mention because it demonstrates another evolutionary solution to the scorpion venom problem. This tiny mouse actively hunts bark scorpions, which are among the most venomous scorpion species in North America. When stung, instead of collapsing in pain, the grasshopper mouse simply does not feel it. Researchers discovered that the mouse has evolved a mutation in its sodium channels that causes the scorpion venom to actually block pain signals rather than amplify them. The venom, in other words, acts as its own painkiller in this particular predator. The mouse then kills the scorpion and has been observed rearing up on its hind legs and howling at the sky before eating its meal, a behavior so theatrically victorious that it has earned the grasshopper mouse the nickname, the werewolf mouse. While this specific predator does not share a range with the Deathstalker, it illustrates the remarkable diversity of counter-adaptations that have evolved in response to scorpion venom across different ecosystems. And now we arrive at what is arguably the most extraordinary chapter in the Deathstalker story, the one that transforms this feared desert predator from a medical hazard into a medical asset. In 1991, researchers J. DeBin and Gary Stricharts at Harvard Medical School were studying neurotoxins and sodium channels when they encountered a problem. Chloride channels in their experimental preparations were interfering with their observations of sodium channel activity. On a hunch, they applied some Deathstalker venom to the preparation. It worked. The chloride channel interference vanished. They had discovered a 36 amino acid peptide in the venom that specifically and potently blocked small conductance chloride channels. They named it chlorotoxin. The discovery was noted and filed away. Chlorotoxin was an interesting biochemical curiosity, a useful laboratory tool for researchers studying chloride channels, but it did not immediately seem like anything world-changing. Then, a few years later, neuroscientist Harold Sonthamer at the University of Alabama made a connection that would alter the trajectory of brain cancer research. Sonthamer's team had been studying glioma, the most common and aggressive form of primary brain cancer, and they had discovered something unusual about glioma cells. Unlike normal brain cells, glioma cells express abnormally high levels of chloride channels on their surfaces. These channels appeared to play a role in the cancer cell's ability to change shape and invade surrounding brain tissue. Sonthamer remembered the Deathstalker's chlorotoxin and its ability to block chloride channels. When his team applied chlorotoxin to glioma cells in the laboratory, the peptide bound to the cancer cells with striking specificity, latching onto the tumor cells while largely ignoring healthy brain tissue. This selectivity was not subtle. Chlorotoxin was acting like a guided missile, seeking out glioma cells in a crowd of normal neurons with a precision that no existing diagnostic tool could match. This discovery opened up multiple avenues of research. In one approach, Sonthamer and his collaborators attached a radioactive iodine molecule to chlorotoxin, creating a targeted radiotherapy that could deliver radiation directly to glioma cells from the inside, sparing surrounding healthy tissue. Clinical trials of this approach produced encouraging results, with some patients experiencing significant tumor shrinkage where conventional treatments had failed. In early trials, the treatment nearly doubled the life expectancy of participants with recurrent glioblastoma, though the program was interrupted by funding difficulties related to the 2008 financial crisis. Meanwhile, Jim Olson, physician scientist at Fred Hutchinson Cancer Center in Seattle developed another application. He attached a fluorescent molecule to chlorotoxin, creating a product he called tumor paint, designated BLZ-100 for clinical purposes. The idea was elegant. During brain surgery, one of the most agonizing challenges facing a surgeon is determining where the tumor ends and the healthy brain begins. Removing too little tumor means the cancer comes back. Removing too much means destroying brain tissue that the patient needs for speech, movement, memory, or personality. Traditional MRI can identify tumor masses, but its resolution has a lower limit. It cannot reliably detect clusters of fewer than about 500,000 cancer cells. Tumor paint, guided by chlorotoxin's affinity for glioma cells, could potentially highlight clusters as small as 200 cells, a 2,500-fold improvement in sensitivity. The fluorescent compound makes tumor tissue glow under near-infrared light, giving the surgeon a real-time, glowing map of exactly where the cancer is during the operation. The story of how tumor paint reached clinical trials is itself remarkable. When traditional grant funding proved elusive, Olson turned to crowdsourcing, raising money from public donations to fund his research, an unusual approach for a cutting-edge biomedical project. Clinical trials eventually began in 2015, exploring the safety and efficacy of BLZ-100 in human patients. More recently, scientists at City of Hope, a major cancer research center in California, took the chlorotoxin concept in yet another direction. They developed the first chimeric antigen receptor T-cell therapy, known as CAR-T, that uses chlorotoxin as its targeting mechanism. In conventional CAR-T therapy, a patient's own immune cells are extracted, genetically engineered to recognize a specific protein on cancer cells, and then reinfused into the body to hunt down and destroy the tumor. The City of Hope team replaced the typical antibody-based targeting domain with chlorotoxin, creating a CAR-T cell that uses the scorpion peptides binding properties to find and attack glioblastoma cells. The approach has entered human clinical trials after receiving FDA approval to proceed, and early results have generated significant optimism in the neuro-oncology community. Beyond cancer, there is preliminary evidence that other components of Deathstalker venom may have applications in treating diabetes, as some of the neurotoxins act on channels that have been linked to insulin regulation. Research in this area is still in its early stages, but the potential is intriguing. It is worth pausing here to address a common misconception. The astronomical price of Deathstalker venom, that $39 million per gallon figure, has led to a cottage industry of people attempting to farm scorpions and sell their venom for profit. This is, by and large, a fool's errand. A single scorpion produces only about 2 milligrams of venom per milking session. To fill a gallon would require milking a scorpion roughly 2.5 million times, and the buyers of raw venom are not private individuals on the internet. They are pharmaceutical companies and research institutions that mostly work with synthetic versions of the relevant compounds anyway. Modern biotechnology has made it possible to produce chlorotoxin and other key peptides using genetically modified bacteria, eliminating the need to milk thousands of scorpions. the romanticized image of a scorpion farmer getting rich off liquid gold does not survive contact with reality. What is real, however, is the broader lesson. This animal's venom, shaped by hundreds of millions of years of evolutionary pressure to paralyze insects and deter predators in a sandy wasteland, contains molecular tools that may help solve one of humanity's most intractable medical problems. Evolution did not design chlorotoxin to fight cancer. It was designed chlorotoxin to interfere with ion channels in insect nervous systems. The fact that glioma cells happen to express similar channels is a coincidence, a beautiful, life-saving coincidence. It is a reminder that the natural world is full of solutions to problems we have not yet learned how to ask properly. Despite its fearsome reputation and its newfound celebrity in medical research, the Deathstalker occupies a strangely precarious position. The International Union for Conservation of Nature, the IUCN, has not formally evaluated Leiurus quinquestriatus, which means it does not have an official conservation status. It is not listed as endangered, threatened, or even of least concern, because no comprehensive assessment of its population size, distribution trends, or threat levels has been conducted. In many ways, this animal is invisible to the conservation apparatus that tracks and protects other species. This does not mean it is without threats. Scorpions in general face a growing list of pressures. Habitat destruction from urbanization and agricultural expansion is fragmenting the desert and scrubland ecosystems that scorpions depend on. Climate change is altering temperature and precipitation patterns across the Middle East and North Africa in ways that could shift the boundaries of suitable habitat collection for the exotic pet trade, while not the existential threat that some alarmists suggest, does remove individuals from wild populations, and the Deathstalker's notorious reputation makes it a prized target for collectors willing to pay premium prices and navigate legal restrictions. And then there is the venom extraction industry, which, while still small, has the potential to create unsustainable harvesting pressure if demand continues to grow. Scorpions, as a group, have certain biological characteristics that make them more vulnerable to population declines than you might expect from such ancient and resilient animals. They have relatively small litter sizes compared to many other arthropods. Their generation times are long, with some species taking years to reach reproductive maturity. Female mortality before reproduction can significantly impact population growth rates. And because many species are highly habitat-specific, with restricted ranges and limited dispersal abilities, they can be pushed toward local extinction by relatively small-scale environmental changes. Several scorpion species around the world are already known to be declining, and many may disappear before they have even been formally described by science. The Deathstalker, with its broad geographic range and ability to tolerate extremely harsh conditions, is probably not at immediate risk of extinction, but probably not at immediate risk is a far cry from safe, especially for an animal that has never been properly surveyed. We do not know how many Deathstalkers exist. We do not know whether their numbers are stable, increasing, or declining. We do not know how fragmented their populations are or how well they can adapt to the rapid environmental changes sweeping across their range. What we do know is that this animal has survived for hundreds of millions of years through mass extinctions, continental shifts, and catastrophic climate swings. By being perfectly adapted to a specific set of conditions, if those conditions change faster than the Deathstalker can adjust, not even 400 million years of evolutionary success will be enough. There is also a philosophical dimension to the Deathstalker's story that is worth sitting with for a moment. Here is an animal that most people would instinctively kill on sight. A small, venomous creature associated with pain, danger, and death. And yet, buried in its venom, is a molecule that may save the lives of children with brain tumors. If the Deathstalker had gone extinct before Harold Sonthamer made his connection between chlorotoxin and glioma cells, that discovery might never have happened. We would not even know what we had lost. Every species on this planet carries within it a library of biological information, molecular tools, strategies, and solutions that have been tested and refined by the most rigorous quality control process in existence, natural selection operating over deep time. When a species disappears, that library burns, and we rarely know what was in it until it is too late. The Deathstalker is not cute. It is not cuddly. It will never be the face of a conservation campaign. But it is, in its own way, one of the most compelling arguments for why biodiversity matters, why even the creatures we fear and misunderstand deserve our attention and our protection, because sometimes the most dangerous thing in the desert is also the thing that could save your life. Consider, for a moment, the sheer improbability of the Deathstalker's medical journey. A Harvard researcher needed to clear chloride channel noise from a sodium channel experiment and grabbed a vial of scorpion venom on a long shot. A neuroscientist studying brain cancer noticed that glioma cells expressed abnormal chloride channels and remembered reading about that venom compound. A pediatric oncologist at a cancer center in Seattle figured out how to attach a fluorescent tag to the peptide and fund the whole thing through crowdsourcing because nobody would give him a grant. A team in California engineered a living immune cell to use the same peptide as its targeting mechanism. Each of these connections was individually unlikely. Together, they represent a chain of insight and serendipity that stretches from the desert floor of North Africa to the operating theaters of the world's most advanced hospitals, and none of it would have been possible without a small, pale, bad-tempered scorpion that has been doing its thing in the sand for longer than any of us can meaningfully comprehend. 400 million years. That is the Deathstalker's inheritance. That is the depth of the biological library written into its genes. Its venom, its exoskeleton, its pectinase, its metabolic tricks, and its reproductive dances. We have been studying it seriously for less than a century. We have been using its venom in cancer research for about 30 years. We are barely at the introduction of a very long book, and already the pages we have read are changing medicine. What else is in there? What other molecular tools are waiting in the Deathstalker's venom? Or in the venoms of the 2,500 other scorpion species? Or in the biological libraries of the millions of other organisms with whom we share this planet? We do not know. And that is exactly the point. We do not know what we have not yet discovered, and we cannot discover it if it no longer exists. So the next time you see a scorpion, whether it is a photograph on a screen or a real animal under a rock in some arid corner of the world, take a moment before you react with disgust or fear. Look at it, really look at it. That small, ancient, armored body has been solving problems on this planet since before fish had jaws. Its venom is a chemical encyclopedia written in the language of ion channels and peptide folds. Its survival strategies are a masterclass in efficiency and adaptation. And somewhere in its biology, there may be an answer to a question that no one has thought to ask yet. Thank you for watching. If you found this video interesting, consider hitting that subscribe button and dropping a comment below about what animal you would like us to cover next. Share this video with someone who loves nature, and we will see you in the next one. Sleep well